They cannot comprehend how much you noticed while pretending not to. That is the unsettling part. Your silence hid an intelligence they dismissed. They believed you were not a V, stumbling in their shadows, unaware of the traps they laid. But all the while, you were cataloging, observing, collecting every subtle cue. You caught the tone shift when they lied, the hesitation before they acted, the look of guilt that flashed before their smile. They assumed ignorance was your weakness, but ignorance was your mask. The moment you revealed just how much you knew, the ground shook beneath them. It is not prophecy that makes you dangerous. It is the sheer depth of your awareness. People cannot handle someone who sees through them yet refuses to announce it. That composure feels like cruelty to them, because it shows you outgrew their reach. What unnerves them most is the accuracy of your instincts. You named the betrayal before it unfolded. You spoke the truth they denied, and reality eventually sided with you. That is what gives you the aura of having a crazy IQ. It is not that you solved equations, but that you solved people. Human behavior is more predictable than weather, yet most ignore the forecast. You paid attention to the storms long before the clouds formed. You understood that fear makes them run, envy makes them sabotage, desire makes them reckless. While they pretended to be mysterious, you already traced their steps to the inevitable conclusion. That terrifies them. They realize you were never playing their game. You were playing beyond it. There is a strange power in listening more than speaking. People reveal themselves when they think no one is taking notes. They ramble, exaggerate, justify, and project. Each word becomes a brick in the structure of their psychology. You stood in silence while they built a house of contradictions, and by the time they finished, you already knew how it would collapse. This patience masquerades as stupidity in their eyes, but it is lethal intelligence in disguise. You did not rush to correct them. You did not argue to prove yourself right. You let them believe you were behind, when in reality, you were waiting for the exact moment to step ahead. That patience broke them more than confrontation ever could. Knowledge without reaction is terrifying. They expected your discovery to erupt into chaos. They thought you would scream, chase, demand answers. Instead, you stayed still. That composure carried the weight of 1,000 storms. It showed them your intelligence was not only in seeing through them, but in controlling yourself after knowing. That kind of discipline is rare. Anyone can gather information, but few can hold it without exploding. You held it, sharpened it, let it transform into clarity instead of noise. When you finally acted, it was not an outburst. It was a precision strike. One move dismantled their entire illusion. They thought you were guessing, but you were calculating. They thought you were playing small, but you were simply waiting for the right moment to end the game. Psychology explains why they underestimated you. People project their own limits onto others. If they are careless, they assume you are careless. If they cannot control themselves, they assume you cannot control yourself. They build their strategy on the belief that you are like them. That is why your intelligence feels so alien to them. You are not like them. You endure silence they cannot bear. You pay attention to details they ignore. You piece together truths they scatter. When reality exposes the difference, they panic. Their manipulation, once so effective, becomes laughable. Their lies, once convincing, sound hollow. They cannot understand how you knew, because they cannot fathom what true observation looks like. That blindness is their downfall, and your strength is being awake where they sleep. The brilliance they call IQ is often just memory sharpened by awareness. You remember the little things they dismissed. The contradiction between yesterday's excuse and today's story. The way their energy shifted when certain names appeared. The way they avoided accountability in every conflict. You stitched these fragments into a tapestry they never knew they were weaving. That is why your clarity feels supernatural. To them, it looks like magic. To you, it is discipline. You paid attention while they assumed no one would. They lived carelessly, believing no one was watching. They forgot that silence often sees the most. You were silent, but you were never blind. They will call you dangerous now, not because you harmed them, but because you unmasked them. Knowledge has always been the deadliest weapon, sharper than any blade. You carry it without shouting, without displaying it like a trophy. That unsettles them more. If you revealed only half of what you know, they would crumble under the weight. But you do not reveal everything. You let them sit in uncertainty, wondering how much of their mask you already destroyed in your mind. That fear eats them alive. They thought they had the upper hand, but they live now in paranoia, unsure of how much you really see. That paranoia is your silent victory. What they fail to grasp is that intelligence is not about being clever. It is about being aligned. You aligned observation with action. You aligned patience with timing. You aligned knowledge with restraint. That is why they cannot compete with you. They think intelligence is about quick words, witty arguments, or manipulative games. You showed them it is about understanding the root of behavior, predicting its outcome, and refusing to be shaken by it. You let their own cycles expose them. That is intelligence that cannot be faked. They thought they were the players, but you revealed they were only pawns moving in a pattern too obvious to ignore. You frightened them because you never needed validation. They wanted you to prove your intelligence, to fight for recognition, to beg for acknowledgement. But you did not. You stayed silent until the silence itself screamed louder than words. When you finally spoke, it was undeniable. You dismantled them in a single line, and they could not argue back. That is the mark of true mastery. Your intelligence does not exist to be displayed. It exists to guide your survival, your composure, your rise. They cannot grasp this because their worth depends on being seen. Yours depends only on being certain. Certainty is the rarest currency in a world full of lies, and you spend it with precision. So when they whisper about your crazy IQ, let them. Let them wonder how you knew what you knew. Let them sit in the discomfort of realizing they underestimated the wrong person. You are not extraordinary because of prophecy. You are extraordinary because you paid attention when others looked away. You understood human fear, human desire, human repetition. You anticipated their betrayal before they made it. You endured their chaos without losing yourself. You turned silence into a weapon sharper than their noise. That is why they are shaken. That is why they panic. They cannot believe how much you knew, because knowing that much requires a depth they will never touch. And that depth is the place you now live in, untouchable, unbothered, and entirely ahead of them. They thought your silence was weakness, but it was the sharpest blade you carried. You let them talk. You let them perform. You let them believe their own illusion. Every lie they told, every contradiction they slipped, every excuse they rehearsed, you recorded it all in silence. They thought you were distracted while they schemed, but you were studying. They thought you were passive, but you were patient. That is why, when you finally spoke, the words cut deeper than rage ever could. They were not shocked by the sentence itself. They were shattered by the realization that you had been watching the entire time. The trap they thought was hidden had been obvious to you from the beginning. They were not exposed by your mouth, but by your memory. Observation is a power most people never wield because they crave reaction. They want to clap back instantly, to defend their pride, to prove their intelligence in the moment. You chose differently. You absorbed the details without the need to perform. You memorized their movements, their tells, their rehearsed strategies. You stored them quietly like ammunition. That restraint is what terrifies them most. They built their schemes assuming you would react in chaos. Instead, you became still, giving them no clue how much you had noticed. When you finally revealed fragments of what you had stored, their knees buckled. They realized your silence had not been empty. It had been a mirror reflecting every move they thought was invisible. The shocking part for them was not what you said, but when they realized you could have said it sooner. That is where the fear crept in. You had evidence long before the reveal, yet you allowed them to keep playing their games. That patience haunted them. You let them twist deeper into their own lies. Let them believe they were clever. Let them think they had control. Then, at the exact moment when they felt untouchable, you unveiled your awareness. It was not the words that destroyed them. It was the length of time you had carried that knowledge in silence. They realized they had been naked before you for longer than they imagined. Their pride shattered when they understood the performance was never convincing. You had simply chosen not to interrupt it. The psychology of power is rooted in timing. Anyone can shout the truth the moment they see it. Few have the discipline to hold it until it burns through the illusion completely. You mastered timing. You let your awareness mature. You gave their patterns enough rope to strangle their own credibility. Then, when you finally stepped forward, The truth carried the weight of inevitability. They were shocked not because they doubted your intelligence, but because they never expected your silence to hold such precision. You trained them to underestimate you, and then you punished them with the reveal. That is why they fear you. You are not impulsive. You are deliberate. Your observation stretched long enough to prove mastery, and mastery humbles arrogance faster than anything. They underestimated what it means to be truly watched. Observation changes everything. When someone knows your moves before you make them, the game ends before it begins. You watched not only their actions, but their fears. You noticed how their anger always disguised insecurity. You saw how their charm always appeared after guilt. You marked the rhythm of their betrayal and memorized its pulse. While they thought they were unpredictable, you were already predicting the repetition. That is why your revelation shocked them. They realized you were not commenting on one moment. You were exposing an entire history of behavior. The length of your silence told them you had mapped their entire cycle. And once someone knows your cycle, you have no weapons left. What disturbs them most is the realization that you were always 2 steps ahead. You smiled when they lied, not because you believed, but because you were storing the evidence. You stayed calm when they tried to provoke you, not because you were weak, but because you saw the desperation in their tactic. You let them think they had power, while you were watching the strings. When you finally spoke, the words carried an authority they could not fight. They were not shocked at your accusation. They were broken by your accuracy. They realized you had been present in ways they never considered. You had seen them more clearly than they saw themselves, and that clarity left them trembling. Observation also gives you freedom. You no longer feel betrayed by their actions, because you anticipated them long before they unfolded. The shock disappears. The pain remains, but the pain becomes manageable because it carries no confusion. That composure unsettles them. They wanted to see you unravel, yet you stood with sharp clarity. You are proof that silence is not emptiness but preparation. When they thought they were performing unseen, you were memorizing their script. When they thought they controlled the stage, you were studying the set. They cannot comprehend how much of themselves they gave away to your observation. They are haunted by the thought that you know even more than you revealed. The greatest weapon you hold is not your knowledge, but your restraint. You could have exposed them earlier, but you waited. You could have dismantled them instantly, but you let them build false confidence. That waiting is what made your eventual words sting like a blade. They are terrified not because of what you showed them, but because of what you chose not to. The unknown portion of your observation unsettles them. They wonder how much you still hold, how many secrets remain unspoken, how much more you could dismantle if you wanted. That paranoia eats at them in the quiet hours, long after your words faded. You weaponize silence into a scar that will never heal for them. People often fear intelligence, but what they truly fear is intelligence disguised as patience. They can brace for loud opponents. They can argue against those who confront, but they are powerless against those who watch quietly and wait. You embodied that power. They were shocked by the years, the months, the days you stayed still, gathering every fragment of evidence. That is why your words felt heavy when they finally landed. They were not singular. They were compounded weight, every observation compressed into one strike. They realized the damage was not in what you said, but in the long shadow of what you had been seeing all along. The manipulator always thinks they are untouchable, and that thought alone is what exposes them. Their arrogance is not a shield, it is a spotlight. You can hear it in the way they over-explain, piling words where silence would suffice. You can see it in the way they smirk when they believe they've convinced you. You can feel it in the way they treat your patience as ignorance. They are addicted to control, and that addiction is louder than anything they say. Once you learn to watch not their words but their hunger, their strategies unravel before your eyes. Every move they make is not clever. It is predictable. Their arrogance convinces them they are hidden, but it is the very thing that betrays them. Control is never subtle when it's desperate. You notice how they twist conversations so the blame never lands on their shoulders. You notice how they guilt trip, making you the villain while they play the victim. You notice how they use silence as a weapon, waiting for you to crumble under uncertainty. These are not mysteries. They are desperate grabs for control. They think you are too distracted to see the strings. But you have learned that arrogance always leaves fingerprints. The louder they deny, the clearer the truth becomes. They believe they are scripting your responses, but all they are doing is handing you a map of their next move. The manipulator exposes themselves every time they overreach. Think about how arrogance blinds them. They believe they can repeat the same patterns forever without consequence. They believe charm will erase suspicion, excuses will erase memory, and fear will erase your backbone. They cannot see the moment their performance becomes sloppy, because their arrogance tells them you will always accept it. That blindness is your advantage. You notice the recycled lies, the repeated tactics. The familiar tone shifts. Each repetition becomes easier to read. What they call mastery, you call routine. Once you see their routine, you stop being a participant. You stop being a pawn on their board and become the player who watches the whole game. Their arrogance blinds them to this shift, and by the time they realize you've seen through it, their control has already shattered. A manipulator's desire to control reveals more than their intentions. It reveals their fear. Control is always the mask for terror. They fear being abandoned, so they cling tighter. They fear being powerless, so they dominate conversations. They fear being exposed, so they hide behind lies. The arrogance you see on the surface is only a disguise for how fragile they are inside. This is why their moves are easy to anticipate. Every attempt at control is fueled by the same wound. They are not creative. They are not unpredictable. They are bound to their fear, and fear has no imagination. Once you learn their fear, you already know their next tactic. They are only as powerful as your blindness allows them to be. What unsettles them most is when you do not react. Their arrogance assumes you will bite the bait every time. They think you will argue, defend, chase, or cry. But when you refuse, when you sit still and let their manipulation bounce back onto them, they panic. Their addiction to control becomes exposed in its rawest form. You watch their calm slip into rage, their smirk twist into desperation. This is the moment they are revealed. They never prepared for silence, because arrogance never prepares for resistance. Your refusal to play the game they designed is the checkmate they never saw coming. They thought their desire to control made them powerful. Instead, it made them predictable. There is a psychological truth manipulators cannot escape. Arrogance shortens vision. They are so focused on dominating the moment that they cannot see the long game. They win arguments but lose trust. They control situations but destroy relationships. They silence you but reveal their insecurity louder each time. Their arrogance convinces them that control equals victory, yet every move exposes their fragility. You, on the other hand, have patience. You let them win the small battles, because you know arrogance eventually collapses under its own weight. They believe they are playing chess, but in reality, they are playing the same move over and over while you memorize the pattern. That is not strategy, it is repetition, and repetition always loses against observation. The irony is that manipulators mistake arrogance for intelligence. They think their ability to bend others makes them smarter. But intelligence is not about control, it is about awareness. Their lack of awareness is what exposes them. They cannot see how obvious they are becoming. They cannot sense how much you are watching. They cannot imagine how long you have been studying their every tactic. Arrogance convinces them they are invincible, but invincibility exists only in their head. In reality, you are already 3 moves ahead. You are no longer reacting. You are anticipating. That shift changes everything. They may believe they are the puppet master, but you have already cut the strings in your mind. When you finally confront them, their shock is not about the words you speak. It is about realizing how much you knew all along. They thought you were blind, yet you were awake the entire time. Their arrogance told them you would never notice, but your silence was sharper than any accusation. They never accounted for the fact that you were documenting every pattern, every contradiction, every shift. When you finally laid the truth bare, it was not your words that broke them. It was the weight of their own exposure. Their arrogance had convinced them they were invisible, and you revealed they were nothing but glass. That shattering echo will follow them forever. What they call power was nothing but a performance. They depended on you to believe their script, to accept their framing, to obey their cues. Your awakening ended the play. You stopped acting, and the entire performance collapsed. Their arrogance blinded them to how fragile their theater really was. They underestimated the strength of observation, the resilience of patience, the deadliness of silence. Now they live with the memory of how easily you dismantled them without screaming, without chaos, without revenge. Their arrogance made them predictable, and your awareness made you untouchable. That balance of clarity and restraint is what leaves them haunted long after you have walked away. Those who depend on secrecy build their lives on a foundation of glass. They act as if no one sees, as if their whispers cannot travel, as if the cracks in their behavior do not scream louder than their words. They thrive only as long as you are blind. The moment you begin to observe, the glass beneath them trembles. Their entire confidence is tied to the illusion that the truth will stay hidden. You strip away that illusion, and suddenly they look fragile, trembling in ways they swore they never would. Their panic is not about the truth itself. It is about losing the mask they believed made them untouchable. You do not even have to expose them publicly. Simply knowing already suffocates them, because their empire was never real. It was always a shadow waiting for the first light to break it. Secrets rot the keeper from the inside. Those who rely on them cannot breathe easily, even when they smile in your face. Every step they take is haunted by the possibility of exposure. That is why they speak louder than they should, why they over-explain, why they stare at you too long when you ask simple questions. Their panic does not wait until the secret is revealed. It eats at them in the silence before. You learn to recognize the twitch, the pause, the slip in tone. These are not random. These are cracks breaking through the armor. And once you notice them, you realize the secret keeper has already lost. Their panic is the proof. Their mask is heavy, and their hands shake trying to keep it in place. What frightens them most is not the possibility of you knowing, but the way you remain calm once you do. They are prepared for chaos. They are prepared for shouting, for confrontation, for explosions of anger. They are not prepared for silence. Your stillness terrifies them more than any storm. It tells them you already know, and worse, that you are not rushing to reveal it. Silence is a mirror, and in that mirror, they see themselves unravel. Their panic grows louder, their excuses become sloppy, their confidence evaporates. They cannot fight stillness, because stillness leaves them alone with their secret. Alone, they crumble faster than anyone else. Their desperation exposes them more than your questions ever could. Secrecy creates addiction. Once someone hides one truth, they must hide another to protect it. Lies multiply. Masks layer over masks. Eventually, they are no longer hiding one thing. They are hiding themselves. Their panic is the body's rebellion against this prison. You watch them flinch at harmless questions, stumble when faced with simple choices, overcompensate when they feel cornered. They believe they are clever, but you see the desperation in every move. The truth is heavy, and the longer they carry it, the more obvious it becomes. Secrets were supposed to protect them, but the burden of secrecy marks them like scars. Their panic is not an accident. It is the cost of living in hiding. When you rely on secrecy for power, you are never truly powerful. You are only as strong as the silence of those around you. That is why manipulators panic when you stop playing along. You refuse to carry their lie for them, and the weight falls back onto their shoulders. You refuse to react with chaos, and their mask begins to suffocate. You refuse to chase their explanation, and their own words trap them in contradictions. They panic because their entire game depended on your blindness. You took that away with one choice observation. Suddenly, their house of cards trembles. They realize it does not take exposure to destroy them. It only takes awareness. You see, and that alone is enough to unravel them. Secrecy makes people predictable. The liar always avoids certain subjects. The cheater always grows defensive about time. The manipulator always blames others before questions arise. These habits form patterns, and panic reveals the pattern more clearly than any confession. You do not need to trap them. You simply wait. Their panic will eventually betray them. Their secrecy is not clever. It is exhausting. Sooner or later, exhaustion makes mistakes. A slip of the tongue, an overreaction.